okay, going on to another subject, I have a question.
Sure.
That'd be an interesting topic. Obviously, right now we're going through the whole COVID-19 pandemic thing with the quarantine and all that. What do you think is going to be the impact to horror in the next 3 to 4 years, where it starts to roll out into books and movies?
That's interesting.
I think psychological horror, to be honest. The whole being quarantined at home, facing demons, facing the problems with your own home, with your family and friends. I think we'll see a few movies like that.
That's an interesting thing that a lot of horror writers have been talking about on the internet. Like, they're asking, do you think that you're suddenly going to see a slew of stories about pandemics, or people are going to be writing things that are ignoring the pandemic? I think probably, if I know horror, you're probably going to get a slew of low-budget movies about pandemics. I'm sure that'll happen. Those direct-to-video, on Shudder or on what's that?
The Sci-Fi Channel.
Sci-Fi Channel. So I'm sure you'll have a whole slew of, because like I said, any literary trope, but I feel like the two that do it the most are sci-fi and horror. Very much respond to cultural anxieties, I think. So, but like, you know what, Tom? Not only pandemics, but I like what Tom said about the psychological, because especially with this pandemic, like, and there's no science deniers here. I'm not gonna go on a political rant, but I think we can all agree this thing's serious and should be taken seriously. But it's so surreal. It is. I mean, I've never been part of a pandemic before, obviously. But it's a surreal experience, because I don't doubt for a minute that people are dying. And the death toll is amazingly huge and very, very fast. But like, when I make my weekly, I basically make a weekly trip to take groceries out to my father, because I don't want him exposed to all of this. And I do just drop the groceries off the porch, and I talk to him, 6 feet away. But it's weird, because it doesn't look, to me, here, nothing looks any different. I don't know about you guys. I drive down the front street. There are people driving around. There are people in Lowe's. Yes, everyone's wearing masks. But it's not like my friends who are posting pictures from LA and the highways are empty. I think probably because we live in a more rural area, we're like looking around going, it's so surreal. I feel like Tom is right. The psychological aspect, like even now, I don't really want to write a story about a disease. But I have spent, since day one of this shutdown, I have spent Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. every single day in the horror cave. Because I'm teaching down here. My son has got his day teacher upstairs. And you're almost to the point where you're like, I love the horror cave, but I'm in here all by myself. And I really had thoughts of, like, I wouldn't write about this pandemic, right? I wouldn't call it COVID-19. I'd make it, something generic. But just the isolation, like, what do you do to pass the time? And I would think that there would be a lot of stories like that, dealing with this psychological aspect of isolation. Now, Chuck, you asked us the question, and I've rambled on long enough. What are your thoughts about it?
I agree, and I think you're going to see a lot of, I hate to use the term, but like low-budget movies and books, and obviously there's no such thing as a low-budget book. But
there is. Well, there used to be. There used to be, not anymore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there used to be.
That was Dorchester.
And I hate to say it, because I don't want to be dismissive of it, but I think there's some people who kind of take like the obvious thing. They're like, oh, this is really freaky. Let me write a story on that and focus in on that. I think you're going to see a lot of that with virus-type stuff. I think you're going to see a lot of the movies, not immediately, because one, movies are backlogged anyway, but two, I don't think anyone wants to approach that yet. It's interesting you mentioned sci-fi and horror being very responsive to social issues. There was actually a question sent out to one of the writers of Black Mirror, which is a blend of sci-fi and horror, and they said, we're not making stuff right now because honestly no one wants to even make this or watch this at this moment.
Right, it's
So
reflective.
it's a little bit sensitive right now. Right now, it's more of like escape it. Let's discuss it later. But I agree with that. I think there's a lot of horror writer friends who are like, I can't write this right now. I need to back off and go to a happier place.
Right.
But it's I would say it's the low budget just because it's the more obvious thing. Like let's go with a disease type thing. You know, if not zombies, but something similar to that.
Right.
I think what you're going to see it filters in though long term into I'm going to guess some really successful movies and books in 2 to 3 years from now, and that is the psychological aspect, as you mentioned. I think there's things that we're seeing to new depths that are going to spark ideas. I think social media is going to be a big one. I think there's a big line being drawn between people who are like, we need to reopen the economy versus people who are like, this is serious, we need to hide.
Yes.
And there's a lot of fighting. I've seen so much tension. I've even felt a lot of that tension more than before, and I'm pretty good at letting things go off my back, but you're seeing people who are desperate, and in that desperation, people are reacting in strong ways. So I think that level of desperation, that level of isolation, the way that isolation affects the emotions and turns things up to an 11, I think you're going to see that. I think there's a lot of mistrust between this and the political situation, that social media is a billboard for our differences.
Right.
I think that's what's going to be filtering into horror, and there's going to be that social dynamic of, can I trust people? And how do I go on in a world where I can't necessarily trust people, or I worry about them having my best interests in their best interests, you know. I think that's what's going to be showing up. I think it will filter into books and movies in a few years where the isolation effect, now that people are kind of feeling it more than they've ever maybe felt it in their lives. I think it's going to modify how the story is told. I think, you know, things, you know, a movie like The Thing, isolation is a big part of that, you know, like 1982, The Thing. Isolation is into that. I think what you're going to see is not necessarily more stories about isolation, but I think it's going to change how authors write isolation.
Right.
But in terms of a genre shift, I think it is going to be that broken social dynamic where, you know, I hate to, you know, break the line, but, you know, conservative versus liberal, people more concerned about the virus versus people more concerned about the you know, honestly, the death toll and the ramifications of the economy, because that has a human toll as well.
Yep.
And people splitting off and becoming each other, the conspiracy theory aspects. People are eating up conspiracy theories like they're candy right now. And I think those are the things. I think that's what you're going to see being reflected in horror stories in a few years as things kind of progress back to normal, and those horror writers who are a little bit, you know, stressed right now to write those kind of stories, as they start to process it, I think it's going to affect the stories they want to tell and also how they tell the stories.
Right. You know what I just had a thought. Tom, did you ever end up reading that book I gave you, Our War by Craig DeLuey?
No, it's actually still up on my desk here, and I am going to read it. I got a lot of books to read, actually.
Yeah. So, Our War by Craig DeLuey, it's a wonderful novel. It is not about a pandemic, but what you just said, Chuck, really struck a chord in me, because Our War is about the idea, it's, the president obviously isn't Trump, but he's a thinly veiled Trump caricature, but it's the idea that the president was impeached. And this was written and published before Trump's impeachment. And the president refused to leave office. So then the entire country split into all these factions. So you had the people who supported the president. You had the people who wanted to remove the president. You had the police force and National Guard that was trying to stay neutral but had sympathizers for both sides. You had a brigade of people that were only women. You had a brigade called the Rainbow Brigade that had LGBT, homosexuals, minorities, and things like that. And it was literally a nation that had split off into all these groups and was eating each other alive. And what I have to say about that novel is Craig DeLuey did a wonderful job not picking a side. It was just a country that was tearing itself apart. And what you said right there when you're thinking about a horror novel, like I could very easily see a pandemic version of Craig DeLuey's novel, because I'll admit, I've struggled with my feelings about it too, and then realizing that, hey, I'm still teaching from home, I'm still getting paid, My wife's still working, so even though I believe the quarantine is necessary, let's be honest, I'm not suffering. So that little moment of realization was like, we could be tearing we could be tearing each other apart here. So I could see a novel like that where you had all these people on all sorts of sides just tearing each other apart. So yeah. So
I think that will be there, and you bring up a great point. And so if there's anybody who's looking to write the next great horror novel based on this, not picking a side is going to be crucial. And that's going to be something I think most people have a hard time doing.
Right.
Obviously, we have our own opinions on things here, and other people have their own opinions on things. But I think it's important in writing those stories, you need to at least understand the other side, even if you don't completely agree with them. And you need to empathize and understand there are real struggles, and there's a reason that side A is more concerned with this, and side B is more concerned with this,
right.
Because for side A, this is the more dire situation for them. If they're more concerned about their economy, like they don't have a job and they really don't know how I'm going to eat, well, guess what? Not eating results in death.
Right.
And so and if they don't have a large family, whereas I've got a lot of senior citizens in my family, that elevates the concern of them getting sick. I am honestly really not too concerned about myself. It's more older senior citizen relatives, parents, grandparents, the aunts and uncles. It just changes the dynamics whether you have a job or you don't. So in writing that story and in making it a good story for not necessarily everyone, but to try and draw the biggest audience, you really have to empathize with everyone and understand there's logical reasons behind their concerns.
Right. All right. Well, why don't we take a quick break and then we'll come back with our next segment.